Welcome to the Transition Line Podcast, your home for triathlon news, culture, and the lifestyle that surrounds it. I'm your host, Kyle Taylor. I'm joined by my father, multi-time Ironman age group champion, Greg Taylor. Dad, how are you?
Kyle, I'm doing really well.
Today we got a packed show. We're going to unpack some news about Ironman in Europe dealing with a heat wave. We're going to talk a bit about the Zen master himself writing an article about one of his chief rivals from decades ago. And we will touch on Lionel Sanders' newest vlog where he discusses changes in his why that keeps him motivated. With that, let's get into it. Prime in the news today as we're filming. It is hot as heck in Europe, Dad. Your thoughts?
So we have exciting race news before the races even begin. So today, Saturday, was supposed to be Ironman 70.3 and Ironman in Nice. They were going to have two races at once. And the French government said it's going to be 40 degrees Celsius, which is 104 degrees Fahrenheit. And they decided that they simply didn't have the medical assistance that could potentially be necessary. And there have been a lot of comments about, well, this is an Ironman, we're well trained. But both of these races, you simply enter. You don't have to qualify. And if you think that 80% of the field is just there to experience an Ironman, man, at 104 degrees, especially on the run, that becomes a true heat emergency. And the race in Nice has a lot of uphills, which means you won't even benefit from moving through the breeze when you're going uphill at 6 or 7 miles an hour. Then you get off and you've got to go on the run. Oh, man, that could be dangerous. There's a story of a 40-year-old who did an Ironman in Iowa when it was in the 90s, and he apparently didn't fully understand electrolytes. He ended up in the hospital in a coma for 2 days because his blood sodium was too low. This has been known for decades. And so if you stick 3,000 or 4,000 people and have them compete in the heat for hours, boy, that could be a serious issue. And I think as disappointing as it is for anyone who's trained, gone through everything to get there, it is disappointing, but it really is a safety issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for about a decade, I lived in Phoenix, Arizona, in the United States, where it's that hot regularly in the desert. And, you know, the state of Arizona would regularly have to life flight people out from hikes, tourists who went out in the heat just not expecting how brutal it really is. And of course, these trained athletes aren't quite tourists, but they too are probably overestimating their capabilities and underestimating just how brutal and unforgiving that kind of heat may be. And I think to some degree, you have to applaud the French government here for saying, guys, this could become an absolute disaster, and we're going to kind of protect you from yourselves here, especially because they got to think about not just the athletes that they're trying to protect to make sure that they have a great experience while they're visiting their home country, but also, you know, the medical infrastructure, the doctors, the nurses. If you can't have a hospital overwhelmed by, you know, 3 or 4 dozen athletes coming in with heat stroke, that's going to have downstream impact, and suddenly other people in the ER can't get the treatment they need. So complex issue. I think it's definitely probably disappointing for fans who went out there. Although, riddle me this. You get out there, you've done the training, it's stressful, yeah, you're excited, but now you're in France and it just got turned into a vacation and it's not your choice. So now like you're kind of just forced to eat croissants and cheese and drink wine and like be in Paris, and you're like, oh no, but it's not your fault. Like there's at least some subset of athletes who are like, this is actually a jackpot. I can say I went through all the effort, but I don't actually have to race today. Your thoughts, maybe?
Oh, yeah. Well, I would say that the supporting family members would be pretty excited.
Yeah, that's probably, I suppose, after they get over the tension from their athlete being tremendously disappointed for a day, they probably do get to enjoy the vacation a little bit more.
And they're in Nice, France, on the Mediterranean Sea, adjacent to the mountains. It's a beautiful place to be just for a vacation.
Oh, no, you can't swim professionally. We'll just have to like hang out and float, drink Aperol spritzes or something. Dang.
One thing I do want to add is that for any athlete who's competing in the heat, water is absolute poison. You cannot drink water. It has to
Wait,
be some kind of
I'm
an
sorry. You're
electrolyte
saying
solution.
water is poison in the heat, but that doesn't make any sense, Dad. I have to stay hydrated, don't I?
No, you have to stay electrolyte balance. The guy who ended up in a coma, he drank lots of water and he diluted the sodium concentration in his blood to the point where he was in a coma. So, water might feel like the right thing, but water by itself does not hydrate you. It dilutes the electrolytes in your blood serum to a dangerously low level. So, when it's that hot, you absolutely need to be drinking an electrolyte solution. Anyone who's trained in the heat, especially if they have dark clothing, will notice the white on their clothing. That's salt. And that salt, if you lose too much, it's catastrophic. So when you're training or racing in the heat, you need an electrolyte solution. Glucose or calories are important, but my gosh, if you're drinking pure water, you're going to end up doing very poorly and you're going to end up in an ambulance and potentially in the ER.
This feels very related famously to how Gatorade was created to help the Florida Gators football team who trained in 100-degree and humidity weather all the time. Seems like there's a connection there.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, good luck to all of the athletes getting over their disappointment with the race, and our best cheers to all of the family members who get to enjoy their France trip without any other Ironman-related distractions now. I believe Ironman has tried to make it as right as they can. They're giving people deferments to the next race. Pretty tough to drop the spend on the travel and get out there and not have the race and maybe have to do that again. That's not a fun time, but maybe hopefully those people make the best of it on their vacation for now.
Yeah, there's always opportunities for things to change. There could be heavy storms, there could be rain. Ironman, it's an outdoor sport, and Mother Nature is always going to rule.
Yeah. As much as we think we can control things, Mother Nature, just one example of the things that can't actually be controlled during a race. All right, spinning forward to our next topic here. Bit of a bonanza of content from your guys that you like. Mark Allen wrote an amazing piece on his Substack, I think 2 weeks ago now, about one of his chief rivals from back in your heyday, Dad. Mr. Dave Scott, who he posits is the man who came to Kona and changed it into a race and had some really interesting things to say. What are your thoughts?
You have to go back to 1978. And the reason that we do that is to understand what Ironman meant early on. Ironman early on meant we're going to ski to the South Pole. No one even knew what it meant to do an Ironman. Can you even finish? Initially, there were no time cutoffs. People were taking 24, 26 hours. The stories of people carrying toolkits, you had to have a support vehicle behind you. And the first
24 hours a day?
Overnight. Yeah.
Were they camping?
No, well, they'd stop at a restaurant, get some food, keep going. No one knew. It was unbelievable. Dave Scott shows up, the third Ironman on Oahu. And initially it was, well, isn't this a 2-day event? A 2.4-mile swim, the Waikiki Rough Water Swim. Now, each of these events by themselves was a standard of accomplishment. 2.4-mile Waikiki Rough Water Swim. Oh, and then we're going to ride our bikes. The Around Oahu Bike Race. Isn't that over 100 miles? Yeah, and then we're going to extend it to the start line of the Honolulu Marathon. It'll give us 112 miles. Then we'll run the Honolulu Marathon. Over 2 days? Nah, the gun goes off, keep going. It was so unknown that they even had weigh stations along the way to make sure people didn't lose too much body weight. And there's a great photo somewhere of Dave Scott getting weighed, holding a water bottle behind his back because he didn't want to drop out of the race.
That's incredible.
He set a course record 2 hours faster than they had previously gone.
Wow.
And he came to this as a water polo competitor and a swimmer. But apparently, even before Ironman, he was famous for these all-day brutal workouts. And he came into the race 2 hours faster than the first guy to go under 9 hours, first guy to go under 3 hours on the marathon. He was simply known as the man, and appropriately so. And he just kept setting new standards and began to realize you can race the entire event, not just survive, not just hold back, but from the gun, go hard the entire way. And that set up for his competition with Mark Allen. It's important to recognize that Mark was already a world-class athlete. He was continually winning the Nice triathlon, which wasn't a full Ironman distance, but was still a several-hour event, mountains and heat. And he kept coming to Kona, and something kept setting him up. The first time he met with Dave Scott, he pulls up to Dave and goes something like, "Hey, you want to go for a run after this?" Dave Scott clicks into a higher gear, takes off. Mark clicks into a higher gear, and his derailleur breaks. Oh, okay. There was another event where Mark gets off the bike way ahead of Dave. Mark's going to win. Dave ends up walking. Mark ends up walking. Dave just motors right by. And even Mark talked about, Dave just seems to thrive in the heat there. And there were these continual battles where Mark kept coming up short. Dave kept setting a new standard. And it really set up the Iron Battle in 1989, where two behemoths of the sport went shoulder to shoulder for 8 hours, not sharing a word, shoulder to shoulder until 2 miles to go, when Mark Allen laid down apparently 5:35 miles. My recommendation is everyone should subscribe to Mark Allen's Substack and read the multi-article story about the 1989 Iron War. It delves deeply into the personality of each athlete and describes completely different approaches to the race. And I do remember in 89, they had crushed the course record. They'd run 240 marathons. Mark Allen early on was like, nobody can run this fast, but if Dave's going to, I have to. Dave crosses the finish line 54 seconds behind Mark, and his first thought was, I can go faster. Unbelievable.
Mark reflects in the article about measuring his training, thinking, is this enough to beat Dave? On his hardest days, thinking, am I giving enough to beat Dave in my training effort? And that type of rivalry clearly drove the sport to evolve, not just Mark Allen to evolve. And that's really cool to kind of see played out in the pages of history and zoomed all the way forward to today when you look at kind of the evolution of the sport. And, you recommend that everybody subscribes to Substack. I think Mark Allen's putting out some great pieces regularly here. But say more about what could athletes who are on their first Ironman or on their first triathlon, what can they glean from going back and understanding the great rivalries and the battles in the past?
I'll come back to that Substack article because it clearly defines two different mental approaches to how to get the best out of yourself. It also tells you how a competitor forces you to get even better. And so if you look at it as, I'm doing this race to see what I can get out of myself. And that was the approach that both of them took. So Mark did it as, I think, can I beat Dave? So Dave established a bar, a threshold. I have to be at least this good now. Dave seems to have simply said, how good can I get? What am I willing to sacrifice? And how hard do I have to go? It also gets to athletes and saying, if you're going to do an Ironman, remember, 37 years ago, these two men told you it's possible to compete, to race the entire distance. And if you look at what's happened today, people will say, well, people are so much faster today. There's the, quote, Norwegian method. How do I train? You have to go back and look at pictures of these two guys. Look at the bikes they were on, the clothing they were wearing. Look at their shoes. And remember, the run course was much more difficult back then than it is now because there were 3 major climbs that were involved back then early on in the marathon. If you put Dave and Mark on a current bike with the aerodynamic advantages, gave them an aerodynamic tri-suit, and as we've talked about before, give them the calf sleeves that make them faster, put an aerodynamic helmet on them, give them current nutrition. Mark has already said we're held back by our nutritional standards. They had Exceed. They had the bare minimum of nutrition available. Well, we got Exceed, Coke, and bananas. You give them today's nutrition, give them carbon plate super shoes, and give them an easier run course. These guys are going 7:45. In other words, 37 years ago, what they knew, what they did, still the standard that people are trying to meet. They didn't have wind tunnels. They didn't have VO2 max monitors. They had maybe a heart rate monitor. You have to look back and go, wow, these guys set a standard that still is as good as anything anybody's doing today.
Yeah, and not only that, they were doing it with no internet, no social media to sort of cross-reference and keep tabs on what their competitors are doing. They're not doing it with fancy training camps that people subscribe to and fly around the world to go be a part of. You know, they were just locked in their own individual training laboratories, cooking up everything they could to unleash against each other on race day. Like really, really cool to look back and see that. I also think, you know, you talk about kind of these new methods and these things that people have unlocked. You showed me a video a couple of days ago of some of the Norwegian method guys running in like hot weather, but in full coats and gloves because they needed to weather acclimate. I think you've told me a story about doing that back in the 90s, right?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. So here's Gustav Iden and Casper Stardust, and they were number 1 and number 2 in the Ironman World Championships last year. And they're full long sleeve pants, long sleeve coat. They finish a run. They're sweating profusely. And that's because they're racing tomorrow in Hamburg, Germany. That race is still on, but they've shortened the bike and especially the run. And it's going to be, again, 104 degrees there. So there's a story of 2 guys in a car, and they're driving down a Lee Drive in Kona. And someone points down the road and says, oh, there's Greg Taylor. And the guy says, his partner says, well, how do you know that's Greg Taylor? He goes, he's wearing a hat. He's got a long sleeve shirt or sweater on and long sleeve pants. They pull up next to me. Yep, sure enough, that's Greg Taylor running in the heat. So, yeah, there's nothing new in sport. There are all these different ways to apply the same principles.
So, Dad, another thing that strikes me as I read the article is Mark really calls out that he thinks having Dave as a rival made him better, that he wouldn't have been as good if he didn't have Dave to push him, or the ghost of Dave to push him along. And I think obviously that kind of helped evolve the sport. I think back to watching you compete over the decades, and I know some names that are stuck in my memory from having to track splits of these guys when you were racing against them. So I know you had some rivals over the years. So can you tell the audience a little bit about what it's like to have a rival that maybe helps make you better?
I had rivals in my training, and those rivals pushed me to get better so that I could deal with the rivals I had on the race course. And I can specifically remember Joe Beness, who was an absolute uber cyclist. And I remember early on with the watt meter riding behind him and measuring what watts he was putting out and how many I needed, and then using that information in my training to get better. And I can remember specifically someone else having come in first and I was second, and I'd be competing against him the next year, and in training, calling out their name and letting them know that I'm coming for them. So there's no question that having someone ahead of you really is absolutely the best thing that you can have. You want someone equal to or slightly better than you, and that drives you in a way that, you know, it's really difficult to explain. It functions like a stopwatch in the pool or on the track, or maybe like a power meter on an indoor trainer. But there's more to it than that, because the race day always brings a lot of unknowns. And so you're balancing, what do I need to do to beat any one of the people ahead of me? And for example, Rodolphe von Berg, who's just a little younger than me, I competed against him a few times, and I can remember him passing me on the bike when, fortunately, he was in a younger age group, and I just knew he's a better cyclist than I am. I have to get better if I'm going to compete against him. And so you have these rivals that live in the back of your mind, that push you and tell you that, yeah, you got to get out there today, because if you're not out there, someone else is.
I think that's sage wisdom for folks who are starting to get into the sport, that they should go find themselves a rival, maybe a frenemy that they can shake hands with respectfully afterwards, but really take it to while they're out on the course.
Oh, I agree 100%. Having a training partner or someone against whom you can measure your ability. I had that training against pure cyclists, training against pure runners, or in the pool with people who are collegiate swimmers. They just told you this is what's possible, and it helped reset what you think you're capable of. And it just established a level of ability that you now know is out there.
Hmm. So how about rivalries that you might have had over time with folks that you've got a little less esteem for because maybe they were approaching the sport a little bit differently than you? How would you, any advice you would have for listeners who find themselves in the sport where they feel like they're playing fair and they're watching other folks do things that maybe skirt the rules?
Boy, that's a tough one. Drafting on the bike is probably one of the most uh, egregious things that a triathlete can do. And I don't have a real good way of feeling good about that. People have written many articles that say, really, you have to cheat. That's what you need. I think today, even among age groupers, there's a lot of concern about, are people using performance enhancing drugs? And you'll see performances that just are staggeringly better than anyone else in their age group, and you wonder. But I think the way to approach it is, have you prepared in the way that you know you could? Have you dealt with the almost innumerable issues? And are you prepared to execute your best race? And then define what best means, because there can be a variety of levels of best. And to recognize that there will be circumstances that will be out of your control. And if they're better than you, for whatever reason, did you have the race that you're capable of? And I think that is the healthiest and the best way to approach it, and to look a lot less at where you are on the podium, and just recognize, if you can cross the finish line with the idea that, man, that was the best I could hope for, it kind of doesn't matter what place you come in. And that's important, because only a handful of people are coming to win their age group or make the podium. Everyone else has to approach it with, hey, here is the best I could hope for, and I achieved it.
I think what I hear you saying, and what I've seen you attempt to execute over the years, is have the podium and beating your rivals as a target goal, an aspirational goal. But when you cross the finish line, don't necessarily measure your race just by that goal or not, but instead take stock of what you've done, and don't forget about everything you've put in to get here, and all of that effort, because that effort does mean something as well. So if you cross the finish line, it's still a success. Heck, there's probably even races where you don't cross the finish line that are still a success. But have that rivalry or have that aspirational goal to keep you driven towards evolving towards your best self, basically.
Yep. I agree 100%.
Good stuff. Good stuff. All right. Well, good discussion about the Zen Master. We'll keep tabs on his Substack. Again, shameless plug. Go out there and subscribe to Mark Allen's Substack for insightful triathlon and historical information. Next topic, let's spin forward and talk about another one of your guys back in the triathlon and Ironman sphere of news. Posted another really interesting blog post. Lionel Sanders posted last week to reflect on what has changed about his why? And he reflects on sort of where he has come from and where he is now. I know we talked about it a little bit, Dad. You've got some thoughts. Share with the audience.
It was, I listened to that actually a couple of times because there's a lot of nuances in there. He talks about how early on, and everyone who's involved in triathlon and who knows Lionel Sanders knows that he came from addiction and that triathlon really saved his life. And he describes using triathlon as a tool to run away from who he used to be and get as far away from that as possible. It turns out he did that with a foundation of being a world-class endurance athlete. And in 2017, he was ranked #1 in the world if you put together a bunch of different events. He came second in Kona, only passed at the end of the run by Patrick Longa, who would go on to win Kona 3 times. And Patrick had a brilliantly fast, I think he ran a 2:40 marathon that day to win. And so Lionel has gone through a series of highs and lows and describes how he went from, I want to run away from who I was, to I want to be the best in the world. And he experienced probably episodes where his training didn't quite produce the results he wanted. And I don't know if it was training or mental attitude. He describes feeling like a bag of excrement several times. So he clearly felt very powerful about what would be going on. And you see him get faster, slower, good results, less results, excellent results. And he describes how he's changed from, I want to be the best in the world, and eventually comes to now at the end of his career, recognizing that with a family, he's got other priorities. And I think he even describes, if you spend your time thinking about, I have to beat someone to feel good about myself, you're establishing, you're going to fail, and you're going to fail miserably because you can't tell what the other person is going to be like and what they're capable of on any given day. I know you listened to it. What thoughts did you come away with?
Yeah, he does highlight that, the winners think they're in control because they're winning, but you actually can't control winning. And he muses about the thing that you really can do is put in your best effort. And I think that really is an interesting evolution, especially as he describes, going from trying to run away from where he used to be at sort of the first phase of his career. And clearly he was remarkably talented early on, and that shifted his focus into, can I be the best? And it's almost like he kind of skipped over the Dave Scott, like, how good can I be? And just went right to, can I be the best? And then, to your point, discusses like, hey, when you fail at that, when you're #2, you're not the best, but you feel awful, even though, like, being #2 at Ironman is remarkable, right? That's an incredible achievement. But if you walk away from that and you feel like that's a loss, not a win, that's a brutal mental state to be in. And then he, at the end of the video, he talks about not wanting it bad enough anymore to be training at 8 p.m. every day because he wants to spend the time with his family. And I applaud him for making that choice. And I think that whether he frames it as directly making a sacrifice that is one for one, saying, I will commit less time to training and more time to the family, or not, by saying that he doesn't want it that bad, he clearly recognizes that means someone could want it that bad, worse than he wants it, could dedicate more time to training, and ergo could then potentially be the best, right? So it clearly seems true that he is actually no longer captivated by that thought of, I have to be the best. And I think that's probably a much healthier and happier mental state for him to be in. But I also think that it'll be interesting to see if this really is sort of the twilight of his career. It certainly, as a professional triathlete, you have a certain window Mother Nature catches up with everyone, and nobody beats the ongoing drumbeat of time. Like, he's going to get older, he can't win at a certain point, but that doesn't mean he still can't be someone who is a big source of gravity in the triathlon world. He could continue to be around it. He's certainly one of the more social media savvy athletes that's out there in terms of the influence that he drives and the number of followers he has, and frankly the people that he likely inspires to go make better versions of themselves. So all told, I think what we heard him say are some themes that sound healthy and that I applaud him for grabbing onto. And it's once again fascinating to see this man's sort of mental health journey playing out in vlogs. And I think it's like net a positive that he is doing this, because there are probably others out there that struggle with this balance and kind of can't forgive themselves for both not being enough of a family person and or not training hard enough. And if those people see Lionel struggle with it and come down on the side of family, maybe that gives them some permission to do so as well.
It as a professional athlete, it is an interesting dynamic. There is a lot of current talk about nothing great is achieved with balance. You have to be obsessed with what you're doing in order to truly achieve what is great. If you read the article about Dave and Mark, you'll see that clearly Dave was obsessed, and clearly Mark was completely overcome with what he's doing now. Athletes are training 30 to 40 hours per week, and that kind of time necessary to be at the pinnacle of the sport doesn't leave much room for anything. And so I think the question becomes, for the professionals, how much are you willing to sacrifice to achieve what is the highest level in your sport? And if your goal is simply to experience a high level of competition and a high level of performance, you have to be willing to sacrifice places on the podium and sacrifice being at the tip of the spear. There's a famous quote from many coaches and athletes that say, "I hate losing more than I love winning." That's probably unhealthy for 99% of the people. But if you're going to be Christian Blumenfeld or Casper Stornes or any of the top athletes on the male or female side, there's an enormous amount that's necessary. And I'm not sure just how much you can have a balanced life if that's what your goal is, because you're trying to beat hundreds of other professional athletes. But as time goes on, there does become an effort to modify your why and to decide, well, what is healthiest for me? And I think we can talk about that in terms of the 99% of athletes who are simply there to, well, we'll call it 95%, because 5% are still as obsessed with winning as I was, or anyone trying to win their age group or make a podium professionally or not. But 95% of the people are there to experience the event themselves.
Yeah, I think you're right, Dad. Most of the people aren't necessarily trying to give up everything to get the most they can, but that definitely is a small subset. But everybody has to be driven by something. And any athlete, whether they're completing their first triathlon or they're trying to do their 30th Kona, they're going to struggle at times with that question of why. Why am I here? Why am I doing this? Why am I sacrificing so much? Lionel talks about the evolution of his why over time. Why don't you share with the audience a little bit about sort of the evolution of your why over time?
Why? When you're in the middle of if you're 3 hours into a 5 or 6 hour bike ride and you know you've got a run to do and you're sacrificing so much, my training partners and I have asked that question, why? So many times. And, as you mentioned, I've competed in Kona 29 times, won age group titles and world championship titles. But after all that period of time, I went back and I kind of talked to myself, say, well, so what is a why? Is there a reason you can do this upon which you can build everything else? Initially, when I was going to Kona, my why was pretty straightforward. Professional money went down to the top 15. I was close to the top 15. And there were times when I wondered, can I touch the tail end of the professional field? And I wanted to know, working full time, how close can I get to the pros? And that drove me in a way that really possessed me. 2-hour workout at lunch, get up, swim before work. It was fierce. 100-mile bike ride every other weekend. And I was fortunate to have training partners who participated in that. And so it was basically, how fast can I get? Can I touch the tail end of the pro field? I got pretty close. Then something happened. I began to get older. But the drive didn't change so much as it was redirected to, I got to win my age group. I got to get on the podium. Okay. And then, and this was really driving me for a long period of time. Then 1 year ago, everything changed. I was in St. George for the penultimate 70.3 race. And I had approached that race as an initial stepping stone to getting to Kona 18 months later. I was there simply to enjoy and participate. Something I said, I'm never going to participate. I'm here to win. I can remember swimming and just thinking, this is awesome. I'm about 10 miles into the bike ride. And because my swim was pretty fast, there were a lot of faster triathletes passing me. I didn't care, which is just like so unlike me. It was a perfect morning, 70 degrees. I knew it was going to warm up, not a cloud in the sky, no wind. I was simply there. I was present in the moment. And 30 minutes into the bike ride, about 1 hour into a race, I'm not there to go hard. Everything changed. Atrial fibrillation. And with it, that chapter of my life closed. And that brought what I think is a permanent truth, a why upon which you can build all of your other whys. My friend Luke Sirk told me a decade ago, why are we doing this? It's hot. We were training for a St. George race 10, 12 years ago. And he said, we do it because we can. And that made a powerful point. But after St. George a year ago, I added the tail to that. Because someday I will not be able to. The first half, because I can. The best word for it is, you're celebrating what you're capable of doing. You have a gift. Your body answers when you call it. The alarm goes off before work, and you're joyfully approaching that workout. Those intervals that you have to do, which are uncomfortable, okay? They talk about pain, and yeah, it gets painful. You've got 5-hour bike rides in the heat in the desert. You got brick workouts. First, I'm going to bike really hard for an hour, and then I'm going to run 1 mile repeats. Man, knowing that you can changes that. It's not punishment. It's voluntarily participating in something very difficult. And that second half, I think, really adds a lot. Because someday, I will not be able to. It's sort of this whispering sound in the back of your mind that says, enjoy this, okay? I remember watching Greg Welch on Ironman coverage. He's sprinting up Palani Drive at the beginning of the bike. I wasn't too far away from that in my better days. Today, my legs, even if I didn't have atrial fibrillation, would be telling me, yeah, we're not doing that anymore. And now, 29 times in Kona, and my heart has said, you know what? We're done with this. And initially, it made me sad, and I probably haven't overcome that sadness, but it really says I need to be grateful and thankful for everything that I have done to this point. there's something about this that I think every aspiring triathlete needs to know, and that is when things are going well. Okay, when you finish the swim and realize that was easy. When you're on the bike, and there have been literally times when I've looked down at my quads and said, whose legs are these? I can't be going this well. Kyle, I ran a 3-hour marathon in Kona, and it was truly effortless. There is nothing like that. It's like some kind of a Zen meditation. You're simply participating. You're watching yourself race. Nothing like that. So if you take that combination of that's the beauty of I can, and you recognize I'm not always going to be able to, I think you could put all of your whys on that. I'm going to get better. I'm going to voluntarily confront discomfort. I'm going to build my desire to win on the fact that I won't always be able to do this. I might want to inspire other athletes. I love being outside on a long bike ride. I think all of those kinds of drives, I'm going to be a world champion, can rest on this. And you don't have to invest your self-esteem into it, because you know, hey, I'm doing this because I can. I won't always be able to. Now I'm going to train as hard as I can, as long as I can. And if other things get in the way, that's okay. That's part of, because I won't always be able to. I've got a family that's growing. Oh, my job has changed. Oh, we had to move. Oh, I've got a new baby that's keeping me awake at night. That's okay. You don't need to go there and feel disappointed or feel like you haven't accomplished what you want to. So my advice to everyone is train and race courageously. If you want the podium, chase it. Race because you can, and train with the knowledge that someday you won't be able to, because we don't know when that will happen.
That's incredibly sage wisdom, Dad. And then thank you for sharing part of your story with the audience. I think that is really nice as a juxtaposition to what we talked about with Lionel, and even talking about Mark and Dave's rivalry back in the day, right? All of these great athletes seek to push themselves, and to the last point you made, none of them knows when the ability to stop pushing themselves will come to an end. And that can be for health reasons, or it can be for myriad other reasons that are perfectly valid. And, you know, I think that you hit the nail on the head when you suggest that people should go train courageously. And I think that people should endeavor to go into a race and seek that joy that you found in what turned out to be your last race.
Well, let's put a little tail on that, because there's a lot of people who will talk about, you know, oh, I had a bad race. It was a DNF. I blew up on the run. I wasted all that time. And I got to tell you, I have been on Elite Drive walking, and what did I spend to get here? I chose to do this. And I want to challenge that mindset and give this to everyone, from professional to age grouper. There is no such thing as a bad race. For too many people, a bad race looks at one metric. What was my time? Did I win? Okay? But, you know, an hour into my last race, pure joy, just present, atrial fibrillation. And by every measure, that was a bad race. I didn't finish. But I still carry that memory. And it's one of the most profound memories in the over 250 triathlons. And it gave me something a PR couldn't do. That every race, the glorious ones, the painful ones, they teach you something. Teaches you humility. It teaches you, well, I went too hard on the swim, or I didn't monitor my nutrition properly. It forces you to face parts of yourself that only show up when you want to quit, when you're filled with self-doubt. And those moments make you stronger. So if the measure of success is the clock, shift that away from how did I place to did I show up and give what I could? Did I learn something that I can use in my next event? And did you enter the Pacific Ocean, taste the salt water, see the sun coming up over a volcano, and realize, wow, look what I'm doing right now. This is amazing. Because I can, and someday I won't be able to. You know, those hard days when things don't go as well, that's not a bad race. That's a master class in reality. So you didn't fail. You collected an irreplaceable chapter in your story. And that is never a bad thing.
Incredibly well said, Dad. And I think with that, we're going to wrap the show up. Some awesome stuff here. Thank you to our audience for tuning in. Please like and follow and comment below, and we'll bring you more in the future. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoyed at least part of this.